Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Carla, and today I'm going to be talking to you a bit about my background, my experience working with the Lightning Network, and some of the projects I've been working on this summer. I am visiting Chaincode from Cape Town, South Africa, which unsurprisingly is located in the south of Africa. But somewhat more surprisingly is located at the top of this chart, which shows the percentage of internet users who report owning any form of cryptocurrency as of January 2019. And what I think is really interesting about this chart, if you look at it, is that the countries keeping South Africa company at the top of the chart are all emerging markets. They're all countries that have a fair degree of political instability and a fair degree of currency instability. And I think that's pretty interesting because maybe you can say that people in these countries are just slightly more pro-risk because they're exposed to it in their day-to-day lives. But maybe Bitcoin and the idea that it's better money is starting to permeate in places where it really matters. What was really interesting to me coming to the United States for the first time was how different the payments landscape is. I laid my eyes on a paper check for the first time in my life, which is not a method of payment anyone in South Africa would accept. I was really surprised how few mobile money solutions there are out there. At home, because we have a much less structured economy, we have transactions that occur where people move mobile minutes or data between each other to make payments on the street because it's the easiest way of transacting. And that's not really something you see at all over here where the economy is much more formalized. And the other thing that really surprised me was that I've barely since I arrived here. At home, I make 40 to 50% of my payments with a QR code scanner linked to my banking app, to the point where sometimes I don't leave home with my wallet because I know I won't need it because I have my phone to make payments. So that's been a really different landscape to experience while I've been in the States. Another very interesting experience was that of being briefly unbanked in the United States. When I arrived, I needed a bank account to deposit paychecks into or receive direct deposits, and I went to 5 different banks, all of whom said no. This was primarily due to failing to have sufficient proof of address. We've been staying in Airbnbs this summer, and that booking confirmation is insufficient. And the PO box that I rented on Reddit's recommendation also didn't seem to fool anybody. So for the first 2 months of my residency, I operated purely on prepaid credit cards and cash. And this was a different experience, to say the least. It was amazing to me to see how much cognitive bandwidth not having a regular banking setup takes, be it trying to figure out exactly what you're going to do in the day so you know how much cash to bring with you, but you don't have to bring too much cash, to trying to keep track of the balance on your very dodgy prepaid credit card, which you can only check the balance on an HTTP website, which requires you put in the full credit card details. So all of that was a really grounding experience for me and a very different way of being to what I'm used to. A bit more background on me is that I studied computer science and economics. After university, I took a job at Luno, which is a cryptocurrency and exchange wallet, where I worked on the crypto operations and internal security team. In my time on that team, the most significant project I worked on was a Lightning Network integration, where I added sends and receives to our wallet API and merchant solution. And this project was really interesting for me to work on. It was the first time I got to know the Lightning Network at a protocol level. I became very interested in it. I submitted my first PR to L&D, but I also got to know a lot of the issues that you run into when dealing with this new network. The first one we had to deal with was liquidity issues. So payments in the Lightning Network are routed through what are called payment channels. These payment channels are established on-chain as a 2-of-2 multi-sig with funds committed to one of the individuals in the channel called the funding party. And when you want to make a payment in this payment channel, you shift coins in that channel towards the other party. And this can really be conceptualized as a tube of money where you can shift money back and forth as much as you like. However, it does introduce the idea that channels have direction. So in the image on the left-hand side, A can make a payment to B because A has all of the Bitcoin allocated on her side. However, B cannot make a payment to A because there's no further Bitcoin in this tube of money that can be shifted over to that side. However, in the other one, on the right-hand side, A can make a payment to B and B can make a payment to A because the channel is what we would refer to as being balanced. And when we were setting up this production level Lightning Network node, we realized that having a balanced channel is a requirement. You can't tell users that they can't receive on the Lightning Network because you haven't managed your channels properly. That's a really bad UX, and people will soon walk away from your product if you give them that. Another thing we struggled with was channel management. So specifically when we started out, we didn't know who to open channels. We ended up just opening a channel to Satoshi's Place, which was an interesting thing to have to explain to the finance team, why we were giving 0.16 into a channel with an online graffiti board. We didn't know channels, so some of the channels we opened didn't end up being very productive. There were almost no sends and receives on them. But we'd already paid an on-chain fee to open them, so we didn't really want to just close the channel and incur another on-chain fee, having not really amortized the number of payments we'd made over the costs. So that was a difficult decision to make. And we also didn't know at all how to balance our channels or how much Bitcoin to assign to each channel. And when we were working on all of these issues, we realized that running a Lightning node is easy, but running a good Lightning node is hard. There are a whole bunch of things that you need to do to have a node which participates meaningfully in the network. You need to open and close channels intelligently. You need to manage your liquidity and capital. You also need to be always on and have pretty reliable hardware to ensure you don't lose funds. And at the moment, the cost of doing all of this, the hardware cost, the bandwidth cost, and the time and effort that you have to put in definitely outweighs the fees that you have to pay, that you earn on the Lightning Network. And this means that at the moment, running a proper routing node is incentive incompatible. People are not earning money from doing this, they're doing it out of altruism. And this is a problem for the network because if we are dependent on altruism, it is always the first thing to go when people face regulatory crackdown or just tough economic times. So what I would like to work on is improving the cost-benefit ratio of running a routing node in the Lightning Network. This can be achieved by trying to increase the amount of routing activity your node sees through more intelligent channel opening and closing or balancing, or by decreasing the cost of running a routing node. I think it's important to mention at this point that while I may never be able to decrease the physical cost of running a node, so the hardware and the bandwidth required, I still think it is important to decrease the amount of time and effort that it takes someone to do so, because every decrease we make to this cost-benefit ratio does decrease the amount of altruism required. Even if we are still relying on some amount of altruism, it's always better if it's less so than more. So what I've been working on this summer is a channel scoring subsystem in LND. This is created with the intention to automate the decision to close channels. And I hope to achieve this by tracking scores for your existing channels and then informing Autopilot of these scores so that it can close the worst performing channels. And the reason that I think this is important is that, as I've mentioned, closing a channel has a cost. You pay an on-chain fee, and you have to sometimes lock your funds up if your remote peer is not online. So you have to wait for a timeout before you can access that Bitcoin. But on the other hand, if you don't close a channel, you are paying the opportunity cost of leaving that liquidity locked up in a channel which is unproductive. You're not making payments on it, and you're not earning fees on it. So it's important to be able to offload this decision making to an intelligent autopilot system that can make those calls for you. Some further work I'd like to do in this project is to differently weight these metrics according to use case. So some nodes will want to be routing nodes, which earn a lot of fees and are very aggressive with the way they open closed channels, whereas others will just be concerned with personal use and maybe can have a lot more leeway in some of these categories. Once I've done that, I would like to set up some nodes which actually run this in the wild and see how the various channel closing metrics perform. What's next for me in the longer term? Well, I think that Bitcoin can be used as a system of payments. I think that it's not necessarily apparent for people in the US where there isn't much of a use case and adoption seems pretty challenging. But I think if you look further afield, there are markets which Bitcoin and Lightning would be a lot more suitable. And furthermore, I think that it should be. I think that if this technology stops short as a store of value, it would be a great pity for all of us that we miss out on a sovereign private system of payment. However, if we do look into emerging markets or less typical markets, they have less typical problems. So users are generally a lot less educated, they are much more bandwidth constrained, and they face a whole bunch of challenges which we don't really tend to consider. So this is what I would like to work on. I would like to work on tools that make it easier for as many people as possible to have access to this network. Thank you.